what did you build them in?
The frogs themselves. So the base shapes and all the expressions were built in Photoshop.
Okay.
So the workflow was we took Frogzilla DD's original skull. Then I used a variety of tools like Liquify and so forth, and I kind of sculpted out the body shape. And then we did versions of the heads above the mouth, and then versions of the mouth below at the nose below. And that we did about 26 versions of those. Then those were all exported as kind of like hero face shapes.
Mm-hmm.
Then I had another tool, a free tool called Natron, which is modeled after a visual effects tool called Nuke, which is super expensive. So the whole thing is built basically as a 3-phase Nuke script. So it brings in all of the layers. It does a bunch of fancy image texturing with textures to build out the skin look. Mm-hmm. It mixes in the eyes, and that's phase 1. Then phase 2 is the costuming. So then it takes the frog without any costumes and it applies all the costumes. And then the last phase was originally a Polaroid look. We were going to put them inside of like mugshots.
Frame. Yeah.
Which if you go back way early in Frogland, you'll see a lot of those. Mm-hmm. But that was literally axed by the team, much against my wishes, at the last minute and they had a good argument that it needed to fit within kind of a PFP square profile, and a Polaroid broke that. So I acquiesced and was like, okay.
You realize that you can always just drop a filter. I'm surprised at how creative people are, like that don't come from like a Photoshop background or something
fantastic.
Like that.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Like, and there's stuff that I would never think to do. Yep. It's awesome.
Yeah, and so the fact that we went without the frame, I think, was one of the best calls that we made, because it was a cleaner image. It didn't have the kind of like the distortion look, which I like. I like that look, but understood it wasn't the best look for the project. And then all three of those, then the body, the costume, and then the background, were all kind of compressed into one last giant PNG, which was sent up. But it took...
And they are giant too.
Oh, they're huge. Yeah, they're huge. And the whole thing was, I don't know how big the project was, but like the Photoshop file itself was I want to say maybe a 5 gigabyte Photoshop file with multiple links to multiple versions. So the way it worked was Bugs and I would work in 2 realms, and I would consume all of his costumes as links, but then he would consume mine as inputs to his costumes. So he could turn mine off and then save it and export it, and then I could consume his. And I'd set up this kind of like round robin of a crazy linking and embedding. So you were embedding and embedding and embedding in Photoshop all over Dropbox.
Lovely.
Yeah, it was very sophisticated. And then that was just the Photoshop side. And then the Natron side, the way it worked was there's an Excel sheet with all of the traits laid out that Gamma Bunta had statistically
so that's what he worked on. Was the statistics side?
Yeah, statistics side. And that was called the frog DNA. The DNA was then loaded into Nuke on a particular frame. So it goes from frame 0 to 9,999. Each frame was a row in the CSV file, which was the encoding of all the traits. And so we knew, we could reconstruct any frog from any DNA sequence based off of its index. So even now I can go in, I can load up frog, 1450.
So what you're saying is you could pull up a tiara frog.
Yes, I could. You got me on that. And not only that, but the TR is gonna. I'm gonna leak some alpha. It's gonna make a comeback here pretty soon. So I'm super excited for that.
Thank you, as always, to Frogland for making this show possible. I just want to thank everybody for the feedback so far. Today, we're going to be doing things a little different. This is going to be one longer episode. We are getting to the point of starting to think about looking at outside creatives, founders, and developers. So if you have somebody, drop a recommendation. Thank you guys so much, and let's jump into it with Anthony Schaefer. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Anthony, also known as Shrimp. I'll do the big reveal here. I'm glad to be on your show. This is great. First of all, thank you for doing this. This is nothing short of amazing. It's wonderful to have community members like yourself doing this. This is awesome. So happy to be here.
Well, thank you. So do you want to walk me through a little bit of your history that brought you up to Frogland? We'll do a kind of a quick recap and then kind of get into deeper stuff.
Sure. So I'm from a really small town up in Northern California. Me and my buddies were like little miscreants. We did the things that cowboy kids do, except for the fact that we had computers and no one knew what the hell a computer was, let alone how to use it. Ended up going to school in Central California, got an engineering degree, but did not want to work a single day designing circuits, which is what I got my degree in. Instead, I wanted to make movies, and used the early internet to kind of hack my way into social engineer my way into some players at Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's company, and got myself an interview, and then convinced the hiring manager that I was the right candidate, and fresh out of college was working on episode 1, Star Wars, and did that for 10 years or so. I left after Transformers because I knew that I'd either be working on lightsabers, dinosaurs, or like swashbuckling pirates for the rest of my life. And I needed to do something else. And so I got involved with stereoscopic conversion of movies on the Nightmare Before Christmas re-release, which then took me to Robert Zemeckis because I knew Doug Chang, who's the art director. Anyway, got hired there, met Bugs, and the rest has kind of been a decade of like crazy technology stuff. Michael Jackson's hologram was in there. Worked on the 19 Crimes talking wine bottle, where you put the wine bottle up and it talks to you. Then got involved with walkable VR and the metaverse. And now I build virtual reality applications for medical therapists, occupational and physical therapists. Yeah.
Interesting. So you've been working on some marketing projects here and there.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you hate it, or do you enjoy that side of it?
It's a good question. Boy. So I like the technologist aspect of marketing. What really was fascinating to me about 5 years ago, I realized that there was this branch of ad agency kind of disciplines that would hire technologists to implement things that were kind of marketing line items. I found that out when I got hired at this app company to build games for Brett Favre. And there was like this new term called technologist. And I'm like, what the hell is this? So I changed my LinkedIn to technologist, and suddenly I got all these like new contacts of people looking for that particular kind of brand of marketing person.
Yeah.
So I have a love-hate relationship with it. I thought I really liked it until I got involved with NFTs, and I realized how much work it is to spin one of these projects up. Like for example, the map for New Pangea, that whole thing. Do you know the story of how that started?
Loosely. So I was more involved than most. To the point where it wouldn't really have been fair if I participated.
Okay. So we were working in a collaborative method, but we were also constructing what New Pangea should look like and all the biomes, and it became a bigger project, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, how can I rip up pieces of the map that are done and like give those away? I'm like, oh, ripping it up. So I started photoshopping portions of the map that were done and handing them to lollihops. And I'm like, okay, these are done. These are done. These are done. And it turned into something cool.
That's kind of the awesome part with that. There for the following, couple of weeks, that was like as crazy as the Discord has been. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, so when I think about marketing and the type of marketing that I do love, I look at it like the art side of marketing. I'm probably a little bit frivolous with my term, like getting somebody to have an experience with your project or brand or whatever, where they can, really sort of take it to heart and be a part of it.
So like content marketing, like framing up content and then using that as a marketing vehicle. I can speak the language.
Yes. I was going to say, I was like, we have some interesting similarities too, because the small town side I can definitely relate with.
Right. Where, everyone knows your name.
Oh,
and, you come home and your mom's like, so, the Evensons, well, they own the ranch over by the rock over there. And well, and your cousins. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It's one of those, I have no idea what any of the street names are. It's all landmark based.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've come home a few times and I've gotten locked out of the house. I'm like, Mom, like, why did you lock the door? Oh, the key's like over there hidden. I'm like, when did this happen?
I got self-locking locks because my wife is always worried and I never lock the door. So then I just don't have to think about it. It just auto locks after 10 minutes or whatever. And I got a fingerprint reader. That one was probably for me because I'm lazy, but
it's a technologist in you.
There might be 4 lights in the house that aren't full RGB.
Yeah. See, I was thinking about going smart house. I'm in a kind of a middle of a reno right now, but I get the device and I think, is this going to steal my Bitcoins? And, started hanging out with Address Exception, who's, a security expert. And I'm like, you're just scaring me.
No, that's seriously,
do I have to be scared about this stuff? Like, am I going to get like wrenched or something if I reveal, my IP address, which shows my geolocation, which, has a pathway, arrows to my hardware wallet,
That's why I'm glad that I live out in the middle of nowhere with a large line of sight. I've got a good field. I will definitely, I'm like, if somebody's coming up to mess with us, they've gone real far out of their way.
You have time to like roll up the howitzer and, pack in the mortar. And
it's Montana. So, gotta have a little bit of protection around.
Yeah, I mean, what in acres, just a swimming pool, right? I mean, we just kind of start there.
Yeah, exactly. The front yard our little situation is super interesting because we're on like 220 acres.
Well, that's not small.
No.
Yeah, you're sitting in your house and you're like, who's driving up my driveway?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
Honey,
definitely.
Go get the shotgun. I don't know. I don't recognize these lights. I think the biggest bummer is that with the geopolitical atmosphere that it's definitely caused some divisions among my core buddies and so forth. So hopefully one day that'll
settle down. I had the weird experience of my best friend's family being like probably the only Democrats in town. So I grew up with this kind of mixed background of like, we'd have dinner at their place and talk about politics and stuff. And then like dad would just kind of be like, well, I'm afraid for your future.
Yeah. Right. Just don't bring out like the whiskey and then you start throwing punches.
I was super lucky. Both my parents were sober. They had their hardcore partying days before they had me, which Fantastic. Was good from the stories that I've heard.
Yeah.
You get away with too much.
Yeah, it's interesting because where I'm from, it's like the bottom of the Emerald Triangle, right? So I found out later as my father was nearing the end of his life from skin cancer, that he was like the Walter White of my town because he had such a green thumb.
Oh, okay.
And I knew not marijuana, not crack, but it definitely was interesting to hear those stories. It was kind of fun, and I'd spent a lot of time up in like Arcata, up in those thar hills.
Yeah.
And it's a different breed,
So growing up, I have almost zero pop references. So like I had like a box of movies, and they were all Westerns. So like that's the extent. I was named after Lonesome Dove.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah. So that's really funny because Bugs and I, as we've been writing over the last decade or so, he was always referencing, standard pop culture. And I'm like, I don't know. And I've always characterized myself as like generation, what is it? The more like millennial Generation Y, that era, because I grew up without media until until I was like 8 years old. So I'm like 8 years behind. Partridge Family, never heard of it, never watched it. Brady Bunch, all of my colleagues and friends and so forth grew up on the Brady Bunch. I'm like, I don't know, Full House.
Yep.
It's so weird. My wife will say like, oh, do you know like this celebrity? And I'm like, not really. She's like, what? How can that be? I'm like, I'm sorry. I just don't really follow it. My imagination is taking me other places.
So Bugs was saying that he got into writing, and it sounded like he got into writing kind of because of you, maybe, or because something you guys were doing together.
Yeah. So I started at Disney, and Bugs came in a few months later after me, and he was kind of a creative director. I'm mischaracterizing it, and I know it was something else, but for this company that made commercials. I was running at Disney. I was running this stereoscope, or I was building the stereoscopic 3D department. So that's where you put on glasses, right, and it pops out of the screen. And so that was the specialty that I had built up. And his background, he has a medical background before he got into animation, and so we hit it off right away on like the physiology of seeing stereo. But that quickly turned into storytelling, and I remember the first time he approached me and said, "Oh, I have this animated script. Would you like to read it?" And I had kind of been a study of screenplays since I was involved in the story group a little bit at Lucasfilm. So I'm like, "Oh yeah, hand it to me." And I read it, and I'm like, "Well, this is a fantastic idea, but the formatting is a little wrong, and like you could rearrange some stuff here." And in my very kind of like filmic brash way of critique, kind of met his New York style of argumentative discourse. And we could like find ourselves yelling at each other and both being right, violently agreeing with each other. Yeah. But the way it kind of started was we had a third friend. He was a cinematic director for Destiny. So he did all the cutscenes for Destiny 1,
Gotcha.
2. And now he's at Gearbox, heading up all the Borderlands like movie and all that cool stuff. Okay. Anyway, so he's a close buddy of ours. And he had this script that he had pitched to Disney. And they said maybe like, well, we're going to buy Mars Needs Moms instead. But because they were very similar, they were kind of putting it on the bubble. So Bugs and I are like, well, why don't we take a stab at writing the screenplay? Because it was just a treatment. It was 4 or 5 pieces of art and 3 or 4 pages of kind of what the story was about. It was basically these 2 aliens that crash land on Earth and realize that Earth is worth saving, instead of blowing up. So as Bugs and I started going through this, we completely changed the story to where the alien is under like witness protection program, living on Earth, using alien abduction technology to convert, one-armed bandits to gambling machines. And his son crash lands, and only to find that his crash landed father under the protection program has an adopted Earthling daughter, only to become like Little Miss Sunshine with aliens in Vegas. And so we ran with this story, and we rewrote that thing no less than a dozen times. Unfortunately, our other friend, it was so off his original premise that he was never really happy. But we did manage to get it optioned, never got made. But then from there, we started kicking around other ideas, and we have a library of projects, like literally maybe a dozen or so. One of those, called Tanglewood, we wrote a screenplay to, and then he went off and after a creative fight, he went off and wrote a novel to it. And we did a bunch of stuff separate for a while. Then we came back together to write a story about me growing up in a small town in 1988. And
that's why Bugs had questions for me and found it interesting. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this is what's really funny is that story could be characterized as I don't know, let's just say Halt and Catch Fire meets a little bit of, Wonder Years, but less fun, like less cute. It's like a little darker, something more along the lines of Outer Banks.
Gotcha.
And told more from the framing of high school kids, because of the shit that we did, hacking and phone freaking and blue boxing and all that kind of stuff you could do in 1988 in a small town, because
nobody
the technology
was paying attention.
it hadn't caught up yet.
We still had dial-up. We still had dial-up till probably I was in middle school.
Yeah.
So like I would. My stepdad was a computer programmer for NOAA. He did the interface for the hurricane jets for the data analysis.
Okay.
And then, I would go back to Twin for school, where we were like Tech 0. So like we'd go like fiber connection for my summers to like dial up.
Wow. Yeah. So you got the full breadth of internet, pre-internet experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That is fantastic. Yeah. It is so interesting because people forget how progressive technology has brought us forward, and like what it was like and how painful tech was back then. Like just getting your SOC IP or Winamp or whatever connection it was on the PC. I don't remember. I didn't have a PC, but just getting that to connect over a dial-up was a royal pain in the butt, let alone
it was probably ironed out by then. Like I'm definitely in that like millennial / a little bit older millennial.
I was getting hunted by the FBI when you were born.
Well, and so like it's hilarious that you say that, because like what's funny is when I think back to like we were jailbreaking iPhones and like hacking at just a different generation of technology in that same kind of timeline. Yeah. And like, I just remember being like, yeah, this iPhone is bullshit that it's all like locked up like this.
Locked in. Yeah.
And then go figure I'm an Android kid and a PC kid and for the rest of my life.
Right. So you had Cicada and you downloaded those early apps.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Well, like that's the thing too, is so working for the power company, I've done a lot of scam videos because just social engineering on every front. People are getting tricked online. Now you add the layer of like, if somebody showed up and they have official wear, company logo, shirts, hats, stuff like that. And yeah, so like
it's remarkably easy.
Yeah.
If you as long as you can stay in character and you know the lingo, think on your feet. The social engineering aspect is all just just acting.
Yep. And it's so much tied to sales. That's probably the part that like is concerning to me, or the part that I don't like about where I detach marketing from sales, because I had a sales job. So
yeah,
I have that experience of like what is sales and what is not sales.
And it's remarkable how untechy the tech people are. They know their domain, and as long as you stay out of their domain and you talk how the other domains are, then you're a domain expert, just not yours. And they're like, okay, I'll just pass you on. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'll patch you in.
Yeah, exactly. It's super interesting too, because I always think like, oh, okay, everybody is a broad like technology fan when I meet somebody that's in tech. And like, to your point, that's totally not the case. So it's been interesting to like piece part the different components of like tech and story for you guys, because like with you talking about, I think the Lucas Story group, what was that experience like? What was that?
Yeah. So, rewind ourselves back a little bit. So, you have to understand Lucasfilm as a structure to understand how the story works. So Lucasfilm was considered the core story team, and then there were designated branches that were very isolated and siloed. ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, where I worked, was the visual effects branch. So we produced the images to the movie, like Star Wars, and produced that with an internal team paid for by Lucasfilm. It was recognized that, digital animation was going to be a thing. Shrek was, a big deal. And that if that arm of the company wanted to be relevant, it needed to have story chops and generate its own IP, even though technically, the sole story provider was Lucasfilm, Lucas Limited, not Industrial Light and Magic Limited. So I was a part of this group that worked with concept artists and storytellers as consultants to teach us how to tell stories.
Gotcha.
So one of the first hires for that group was the director of the newly defunct Toy Story 2. So they had started Toy Story 2 as a DVD over at Pixar. The story was not working. They fired the director, and then ILM hired him to come on over. These projects went through the pitch process, where you would write kind of a very lean story. You would put together art assets, and then maybe do some animation, and then you would go into a office in a room with the executives, and then you would say, "This is what the story looks like. This is how it's going to work, and this is let me take you through the story." And then they laugh along with you and give you $70 million to make it. That's how Hollywood works, right? So at that point, they were teaching us how to write screenplays and go through this process. And a new president came in that wanted to own that content. And so what they ended up doing was building another ranch next to Skywalker Ranch. And they hired Dave Filoni from Samurai Jack, I believe, to start Clone Wars. And so they kind of shifted it around, created this division called Lucasfilm Animation, and then Dave picked it up from there, which I didn't end up joining that group, and I stayed in visual image production, visual effects. But yeah, that's how it started.
Like, are you more excited for a writing project, or are you more excited for a visual product?
Well, first of all, I'm like dyslexic, so I hate writing. This is part of the reason that I don't spend that much time
as well.
Yeah. I'm like, get me on the server. Yeah, I'll probably write 3 words. So there's that. I'm like, I will write if I have to. But typically, spoken word or acting things out or drawing them is my way to communicate ideas. So when Bugs and I met, he is a prolific writer, but he also understands story from the standpoint of being trained as a traditional animator, and and he has this cultural brain that's like a sponge. It's like an encyclopedia that he can reference anything, anywhere. So we have this really interesting dynamic where I will just kind of like toss out these half-baked ideas as I'm doing something, and then he'll form them into something, and I'll tear them apart and kind of rearrange the deck chairs. And then we'll either figure out if it works, or it gets shelved or it gets abandoned. And Frogland was very similar in that respect. It followed the same patterns that we had been working together, 10 years before. And it basically went like this, is that Snoop approached me, Gamma Bunta and Froggy Digital kind of around the same time to join the team. And he said, well, Dee Dee, his now wife, at the time fiance, was a concept artist, fine artist, a renowned fine artist, and she had drawn this frog and she loved frogs. Mm-hmm. But it had a few challenges. Like one, it was very surreal. And if you've seen a lot of her work, it has a surreal aspect to it. Yeah. But it lands in this very interesting zone of like, I can project what I want on it, but it's also kind of rough and collagey at the same time, which allows me to project onto it. But it's not refined in like,
it's not refined in product terms.
Yeah, in product terms, but it's refined in like
artistic terms,
artistic and communicating ideas. This particular frog was refined. It didn't look like Pepe, but it had enough inspiration from it that it was just like right on the edge. And I was like, okay, I think I can do something with this. So we were having a hard time not making it look scary. It was awesome. And they were freaky, but they were more or less like the equivalent of if you were to release mutant apes. Not that bad, but
to start the project.
And there was something that wasn't quite working. And the storyline that they had initially had got the project to a certain point, but there was a point where it was like, I'm not sure if this is going to be able to get over the finish line. At that point, we had another member have a project that blew up. That went really, really big that summer, and who was also part of the Rare Pizza cohort. And so
I want to hear more about this too.
Yeah, he bowed out, and there was kind of an opening. Okay. And so I called up Bugs, and I'm like, dude, you got to try this. And he's like, I'm like, no, I mean, this is the future of entertainment. Just join me for a week. And if you hate it, which you will, stick around because you'll hate it even more.
Keep going because there's going to be some little shit in the Discord from a small town that'll be bugging you just weekly.
Yeah, and Snoop happened to be in the Bay Area at the time, and he had the Curve, which is his hardware device. I work for a medical device company building VR apps, and we were considering that as hardware integration partners. So I arranged a meeting with him and Bugs, and we all hit it off. And so Bugs came on, and sure enough, about a week into the whole thing, Bugs is like, that thing that we need to figure out, like the frog aesthetic. And I'm like, I got something to show you, and I know it's going to piss everybody off, but I got to show it to you. And I had re-sculpted the frog. It wasn't quite the frog that you see today, but it was closer. And he's like, I think this is the right way to go. And I'm like, we only have like 2 weeks to do this. We had we were supposed to launch on Labor Day weekend. We'd spent from the beginning of June building 250 traits. We can't launch. We have to redo everything from scratch. And we had like 4 weeks left. It was insane. And we pulled the handbrake. We spent probably 4 of the most sleepless nights I've ever had.
I remember the last, the hour after launch.
Oh my God, it was insane. Yeah. And so we pulled out kind of like that whole work ethic that we were drilled into our head in the film industry, buttoned it up and delivered what we said we'd deliver, because that's what we're trained to do. But what's really funny about this whole story is the way I got into NFTs was that Bugs and I were working on this this project about kind of framed about the true stories of me growing up as a hacker kid in a cowboy town. And he and I discovered *Halt and Catch Fire*, the Netflix TV series, which has a remarkable side storyline that is like my side of the story, which is the Commodore 64 hackers. And he was very upset. He was so upset that he couldn't even work on the project anymore. And it was the middle of COVID. It was, February of 2020, and it was just, February 2021.
Everything was just complete crap.
And he and I got in like this creative argument, and we're like, fine, we can't, let's just shelve it. We've been working on this thing for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Up until that point, got into this yelling match, which we do occasionally. And I was sitting in the parking lot. My wife was getting prepped for eye exam surgery or something. And I went on to Clubhouse, and there was like the first Rare Pizzas Clubhouse, and there was only 5 people talking about it. I jumped into that, and that kind of changed that course. And so I felt compelled, because I basically abandoned bugs for 1.5 years. I'm like, not 1.5 years. Let's go 8 months. I'm like, I'm doing NFTs. He's like, what the hell's an NFT? I'm like, go learn about it. It's the future.
He's like, I hate you now. I hate
and he's
you.
like, whatever. He was, being
a curmudgeon.
Yes. But I was able to convince him to get into it. And he really, him and I, we were able to frame up this storyline and this aesthetic and build a world that we were able to convince the team it was the way to go. And it was started with the mini was the first image that we did. And so I'm like bashing that thing together in Photoshop, and we're like, okay, well, these are like criminal frogs, and they gotta, I love Dope Wars as a kid, playing it on the Palm Pilot. Like maybe we can do something like that. And then one day I'm just like, they're Notorious. Like, I love Duran Duran. Like, yeah, Notorious, Notorious frogs. And it just kind of stuck. And because we've been working together for so long, we, when we get into that kind of flow state, we can generate a lot of work. And that's how the map happened.
It's
just a cycle. And then we yell at each other, and we kind of stomp away and have to
take a few days. Well, so that's the thing, is anytime that you're like high stress creating stuff like that, like everybody wants to think like after the fact that like, oh, events were great. Like I shot events for years. Events are miserable for the person throwing them and the people involved in making it happen. And then when it's finally like, oh, okay, we've hit the tipping point of like, we have enough people to break even. Like there's a couple of barriers that up until that point, those are not fun environments to like be a part of. Everybody's in it. And if you have the right nature, like I give Bugs a little bit of shit, mostly because I like him. I wonder if I found out about Frogland because of Clubhouses, because Twitter Spaces hadn't really been a thing yet. I do remember somebody talking about Lucasfilms briefly in one particular chat that had to be like 8-9 months ago.
Or a year ago.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, are you talking about like the video for rooms?
I used to pop into the video side. I used to pop into NFT general chat stuff. Yeah. The conversations were regularly more so about building projects back then than they were about actual projects. There was
teaching you what an NFT meant.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of it was still education based.
Yeah. I mean, Clubhouse, when it came out, I remember I had just wrapped up being on an animated feature film that I shot. I did camera with in my garage, my little studio here. And it was in South Africa, and I had nothing going on in January. And of all people, Flycatcher invited me to Clubhouse. And he's like, you got to check this out, man. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. It was like into January. And then I got another ping from my buddy Matt at Bungie. And he's like, dude, and I'm like, okay, two people that are unrelated, but both in the industry. I'm like, okay, I'll try it out. And then Matt and I, within a week, we'd been on a few, and then we're like, okay, we figured out the code. We got to change our background to a solid color. We have to have like a certain like headshot, and then we have to
had friends at this point.
Oh man. And we were like, okay, and then what we'll do is we'll make friends with the mods. One of us will get modded, and then we'll mod you. And then the reason I stopped going on Clubhouse is I couldn't just go and listen. I would come on and it like, bloop, bloop, bloop.
Yep.
Yeah, and if I didn't come on, then I'd be a dick. If I wasn't there, then I'd be absent. And so I just kind of like faded off in the background. But Matt and I, we both had blue backgrounds, and he and I would go into videographer rooms and storytelling rooms, 1 minute film festival type things. He even judged one of them, and we would dominate it. And because we both have credits working with Lucasfilm and Zemeckis and so forth, we'd tell like
the bios just crush it.
Yeah, exactly. Like it was super easy to kind of get into the door. But then when NFTs happened, I wanted to make a play, but I didn't know my angle. And it was, I was very fortunate to kind of be in that Rare Pizza room when I learned and I observed how the website minting process of a PFP is built, and then just dedicated my life to it for a year
to understand it. So walk me through the Rare Pizzas thing, because I know that it gets brought up that the team has met through Rare Pizzas. Yeah. Or at least is connected through that. What was going on with that project? Because my buddy and I were talking about trying to do a graphic for him, and just ended up not getting, didn't end up getting connected on it in time. And so that was kind of the generation that I came in. So I was a little bit later for sure.
Well, I mean, the time compression is
all of 6 months, insane, 7 months.
Yeah. Or, weeks.
Possibly.
When I got, onto Clubhouse, it was end of January, and that's when I first heard about NFTs. By the first week of April, I had already called up a friend of mine, Bugs, and then another friend of mine who is a famous fine artist that paints landscapes. And he had transitioned into digital, and then another buddy of mine who was a Pixar, who just left Pixar, and he and I and the fine artist were on this movie in South Africa. So I brought Bugs in, and I'm like, NFTs are going to change the world, and they're like, NFTs what? And I'm like, and so we actually had started to create this project called the Blockchain Collective, which was a Banksy style anonymous group, and we were going to try to build the first blockchain movie about blockchain financed by the sales of blockchain. And so we Bugs came in, we wrote this amazing treatment about the future in 2030, right before 2130, right before the last coin is mined, and how the world has changed. We had this dystopian, crazy artwork. We were talking with the art directors for like Avatar and Star Wars, and we were positioning ourselves to launch this whole thing. And it was when Pizzas was happening. But what happened was that I kind of had this epiphany that fine artists and NFTs were kind of, it was a really long shot. Not only that, but you're not going to make any significant money for it for a while. And the way the curve adoption happened for the profile pictures, it was just like, it was mad money for crazy art that was super easy to do. And it was a little more technical. And the Blockchain Collective, which was an amazing idea, it just kind of collapsed one day when we couldn't move the ball forward. And that just coincided with kind of Frogland bubbling up. And so we took a lot of the ideas that Bugs and I had generated on a couple of projects and kind of combined those together to backstop the narrative on Frogland. But I tried to get Bugs involved with pizzas. In fact, he was on some of the calls. He created the tagline "Art to Pizza Pipeline" or art to Table Pipeline, but it was a chaotic time for him, and he didn't really get it. And ultimately, there's only a few people that stuck around to launch the boxes and then the pizzas themselves. Froggy Digital and I were basically, and one other individual, were basically the tech stack behind the pizzas. I mean, we did it. We killed ourselves. We worked on it way too long, and it's still going. We're not as involved anymore. There's just too many other things that I think we want to finish, and that is land sales. We got to get the land sales out.
I found one of your boxes.
Oh wait, which one was that?
It was the shrimp astronaut box.
Yeah, so that was that. I kind of used that astronaut helmet, which was a photo of me that a friend of mine took when I was at Disney. That's actually Adam Savage from Mythbusters. That's his suit.
That's a reference I know.
Yeah, there you go. That's why it says Savage on it. Yeah, he came over and I took a photo in it and stuff. And then I've been just kind of sneaking that into all my work. But that's not the only box. There's actually about there's a Bugs box. And then there's a box about the story that we were writing. And then there's actually a box that is the contents of one of the things that we had produced when we were kids. And then there's a box that has a bunch of code that involves that story that Bugs and I were writing. And all of that has been kind of compressed and reimagined in Frogland.
Like, unless you had a massive following to begin with, you're not going to have the audience that can be there and have fun in a place together. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, there's something magical and strange about the PFPs that I mean, I have my theories based in Japanese culture where everything has a face and you can project your emotions onto something without having to necessarily be that. My wife being Japanese American kind of helped me learn some of that, but I would say I'd say the other NFT projects outside of traditional fine art, it's a challenge to make them, to hold them up as an example of like life-changing. They're definitely cool, definitely for the artist and a way to monetize directly, all that true. But from the standpoint of like economically, it's really hard to make it make sense.
Yeah. I mean, like, we're like, oh, we have royalties and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I mean, the old art world, you had artist proofs. So like you, there was a system for that. It's one of those, it's like, even as an artist, the way that I'm looking at it, I'm like, I'm still going to put my stuff in a store next Friday because like I have things and I don't want to ship them somewhere to put them up and show them. And I'm like, I want to have representation of those. So if they do move on the NFT side, like, I'm like, I want the sculpture to move with it because like they're pieces that aren't, 2D. Like my old world, like a photo doesn't change, but like the pieces that I'm working on do kind of, you know what I mean? So
what kind of sculpture do you do?
So they're light sculptures. So I'm playing with a lot of like plexiglass, metals. And then it kind of falls into the Art Deco kind of mid-century styling. Yeah, that architecture. I ended up realizing one of my friends is an architecture professor. And I that was one of my fascinations through COVID, was figuring out what kind of architecture I actually liked.
So have you used like fiber optics and LEDs and all those little techniques?
So I started backwards. I have 5 tons of plexiglass in my garage.
There you go.
Yeah. And so I have these like weird manufacturing friends. Like you have film friends. I have friends that like just run water jet shops and like fab places. So yeah, I had one, and he has these just massive piles of scrap that are beautiful. You know, you cut 1,000 pieces of metal out of a sheet of metal, and all of a sudden it's a patterned, 4x8 sheet of aluminum or whatever that would have been really expensive to make. So when I was leaving photography, I mean, I've been using the metal for like house renovations for the last few years, but finally getting to the point of having enough of my own shop built up to be able to like work with it.
That's cool. My younger brother, used to run a Amazon shop that was custom metalized. I guess it was like wall decor.
Yeah.
It was one of the early sellers of that. And like one day I was always kind of a little jealous. Like when we talk Amazon, for a while I ran an Amazon FBA shop for Nerf darts. And so we were like, yeah, we'll make some money at this. And he was like, yeah, this is like, metal is so awesome. And he would get tons of it, literally tons of it, and then put it through the plasma cutters. And one day I walked into the movie studio I was working with, and it's like said cappuccino on the wall. And I'm like, what? Like, wait a second. And I took a photo. I'm like, is this yours? And he's like, oh yeah, that's my cappuccino. I'm like, what the hell? Like, I'm in the wrong business.
So that'd be like my water jet friend.
Yeah.
My side, I'll have to show you what I'm doing. So my stuff is definitely a lot more on the one-offs. I have so much plexiglass in my garage. I'm like, all right, what can I do to like,
what can I do with this?
Yeah, seriously. I was like, if I was really smart, honestly, what I should have done is just chop it into like 4x6 sheets and just resell it.
So here's what we should do. At some point when I'm done with Frogland map, which is staring at me right here at the monitor, and I've had to learn how to be a cartographer in the last 4 weeks, and it's been incredibly mind-bending. Anyway, I will have slices of the Frogland map. We should do one of those relief cuts.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I have the seeds. Yeah, I have the materials. Yeah, like hilarious. I have the materials to do it. Yeah. So like for something like that where it's fun and for the project, yeah, it's awesome.
Right. So you're basically shooting the LEDs from the bottom, and then it hits like a cut, which diffuses the light.
Yeah. So you have internal refraction within the glass. And then it gets into some really fun sciencey stuff. That's probably where I spent the most of my time geeking out. Basically, what can we do here and why is it happening? There's what I can bring to the table right now, which is like they look good. And then there's like you were saying, the pieces that I have concepts, which are like much more elaborate, and then the larger scale. So like I want to light like whole forest areas and have like temporary light show as like the trees or the sculpture kind of thing. So yeah, it's one of those, it's like, this is what I can build in the shop with the things that I have and the materials that I have. And I'm excited to like continue to
that's cool. Do you
go bigger and bigger?
The lights up to any controller or like an Arduino?
So this would be the next step up that I'm going to be dealing with.
What is that, like a MIDI controller or is it?
So these are. It's been too long since I looked at them. So this basically you can get a program, you can output your show. So this would be like a stopgap before you're at DMX, because DMX just makes everything so expensive. Yeah, and that's where like the background was, where kind of all this started was I have a friend with a like show lighting company, and I was like, hey, what do you think if we tried to pitch a project to light a 200-foot head frame? And so then I ended up, I guess I'm going to do this. The other thing is I have 40 lithium battery packs.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
and they're all 24 volt, unfortunately.
Oh, is that from your drones? Wait, yeah.
No. So I have a friend that has a water hydraulics company in California. And I was working on my van build, and he's like, hey, I can send you a couple of batteries. I've got some sitting in the shop. They don't have warranties anymore. I can't put them into my products. And they are 1.1 kilowatt hour. So they're like the equivalent of like a car battery, right, for a van. So they're big, but they're flat packs. So they were an experimental, like heavy machinery lithium battery pack that was built to go into extreme temperatures.
Oh, wow.
So they can operate at like -40. So part of that was, I want to have these sculptures that are 3 foot, 4 foot type size that just operate with like a small solar panel all the way through like Montana winter, the whole shebang, without being hooked up to anything.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love sculpture. Sculpture is so awesome. It's just like, it's a great way to work with your hands and express yourself. I always wanted to make a rolling ball sculpture. You know, you have the latch gates and wires that move the marbles around.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Like Mousetrap the game, but like, built with whatever you could get your hands on.
And there's an entire subculture of rolling ball sculpture artists that use usually bent copper, and then they build tracks with a series of latches on them. And it's something that I wanted to do, I would say, since I was a kid. And in 2005, I got like super interested in it, and I almost bought a 3D printer just so I could make the first 3D printer rolling ball sculpture. I bought the 3D printer, but I never did anything with it. It's like one of those things. But yeah, I love the way you can mix like technology and solid state and digital state circuits with LEDs and actually create something that's pretty interactive and cool.
Yeah, that's been the one big hold back for me, is my programming side. As much as I'm a fan of tech, in the last 10 years, I got into photography, and that's where I lost myself. Like never learned to code. One, I was like, I struggle enough. To your point, it kind of is impressive that you have as much like technical info. I kind of probably use dyslexia as an excuse sometimes. I'm really good at building stuff. I'm really bad at learning like the map. I was like, do you have like, are you bad with maps or like directions?
I can't, I have a hard time orienting left and right. As my family would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So drones, you're a flyer, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you fly FPV and freestyle and?
Yeah, I've always loved flying. It's funny because I have a friend that just wrote a book on becoming a pilot. And so I've been talking with her for the last like year as she's been like interviewing all these insane pilots to like put the book together. And yeah, I'm like, it's great. It's going to be a while before I get to the point of like ever flying anything real. But yeah, for the time being, the drones were like, this is awesome.
Now, I think you posted a video that was like you flying around your property, right? And did I see a power loop in that?
Yeah, so that's the cool part about having your own trees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
you can trim them with your drone.
Well, I trim them for the drone. So like around the back, like by the garage and stuff, there's all these ponderosas, but their lower branches all die. And so I just took the tractor and the chainsaw and trimmed every limb up to about 20 feet because I was tired of random tree branches like just jumping out and snagging me. With digital, it's a lot easier to see them, but back when it was analog, it was like, yep, I don't know why the drone just fell out of the sky. I saw nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that's largely why I stopped flying for a while. Actually, I haven't picked it back up because I was about to, and then NFTs have gobbled up all of my time. But it was just too dangerous. Like flying analog, I would hit somebody, or lose the drone. And there were a couple of pretty big scares.
Oh yeah,
where I was up doing something. One of them was, I have this big one. It's from the aerial, so some of the earlier drones that were aerial combat, the ASL.
Oh, wild.
And they're a polycarbonate frame with like, I think they're 9-inch blades. Like they're 3S, but they're like, whoa, it's like a lawnmower, right? And they're intended to go into aerial combat and fling each other. Anyway, so I attached a 3D camera to it, a 360 camera, I should say. And I flew it way out there, and it had a whole FPV rig that I jerry rigged up, but there was so much vibration that the camera came unplugged. And my wife, who's supposed to be spotting it, was like, I don't know, I lost it a while ago. I can't see it. It's bright orange. And I'm like, okay, where the hell is it? And I'm trying to bring it. The next thing I know, I'm in this big valley, right? And like hills, like big trees behind me, and then like neighborhood. And I see the thing go over to the neighborhood. And I'm like, oh no. My God. And so we went and crawled through the hills of where I live here in Marin, and I found it between two houses in a stretch of open space upside down, and like maybe 30 feet over there was a family having like a picnic on their table. I was like, okay, I'm sticking to like just racing. Like they didn't even know, luckily no one saw it. No, it didn't hurt anyone. But I'm like, okay, I'm just sticking to like, to the ground. I have the little 3.5, and it's like ducted. So it's got foam and bumpers. Oh, yeah. It's like a little whoop.
So it's like a half a step up from a Cinewhoop. So like the Cinewhoops were going to be the 2-inch and 3-inch. So they did these like weird off 3.5-inch. So you get a little bit more power. And then I run it with a 6S battery.
Nice.
Because I was like, all right, I'm tired of switching back and forth. So I just put everything on 6. It's not necessary, but I was like, oh, I've got everything to like get the voltages right. I might as well just have one type of battery. Yeah,
I was about to say, like, that's the only pain with the 6S is, the voltage spikes.
Yeah.
And they're heavy. But I guess you got the power to schlep around a 6S.
Yeah, and the other part of it too is like you just don't deal with the sag, so it's just more consistent.
You mean like voltage sag?
Yeah. So like you're pretty much it's more like a lithium, like you're just done. But yeah, it's up to you. I don't want to be like holding you longer if you don't want to be. But I can grab one of these real quick.
We'll do this segment, and then we'll be like, to be continued, to talk about actual stuff.
Okay.
No. Okay. I after the conversation that I've had with you, this not this one, but on the Discord about FPV, I am pretty sure that I want to have an FPV component to Frogland. Like,
oh yeah.
Like, and I have.
Well, the dragonflies are just like a perfect mechanic, as far as I see it.
I wish I could leak some alpha. No, when we had that conversation, I had been like sketching in my sketchbook some pixely stuff, and I had this. Oh God, I can't. It's hard to talk about it without talking about it. I had this idea of like, what could the frogs have that could locomote them to other places and still have some correspondence to dragonflies and insects, and I just can't wait to show you. Well, with that, I think I'm gonna have to run. So why don't we schedule another time? If you had fun. I don't know.
No, I'm bored. I don't ever want to speak to you again. Yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be a blast.
Yeah.
So, thank you for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening. And this is me doing a better job of outroing the podcast than I have in the past.
Yeah, where it just ends. You're like, I'm done.
Nobody ever listens to the end, and then all of a sudden everybody's like, oh yeah, the ending's kind of abrupt. I was wondering what was going to happen next. I'm like, you got me. You guys got me.
That's a good problem to have. That means people are listening.
I know. I'm all right with it.
No, I think you got a cool little podcast going here. I'm super excited and happy to be a part of it.
I'll just wait till I like make you being eaten by some weird animal or something.
Yeah,
save the compliments. Yeah, don't be too nice yet. I still have you on a green screen, so
I noticed.
Blackmail. Alrighty. Well, I will let you go, and thank you for popping in.
All right, Hazer, it was a good one. Thank you.